I understand the idea of doing some of this paperwork, some of the registrations on your own to save a little money. And I get it a lot. Trust me, I've been here almost going on 6 years, and I hear this from people all the time. The problem is, you're going to save a couple of nickels and miss out on some dimes. You're really not doing yourself any favor. And this is why. Number one, 90% of the people who self-certify, who do their own registrations, their own SAM, their own cage code, their own NACS codes, PSEs, FSEs, TPIN, MPIN, all that, 90% of the people who do it on their own without the help of an attorney, even the ones that go take a PTAC class or seek out help from the SBA, 90% of them are not compliant for what they're trying to accomplish, because there is no registration for dummies book that says start here at A and end here at Z, and you can do anything. Okay, currently in SAM, there's 1.2 million for-profit vendors. Out of those, over 900,000 are inactive. I'm not talking about compliant. I'm talking about they're not even active in the system. Only 337,000, roughly 340,000 are actually active. And out of those, not all of those are compliant for what they're trying to accomplish. Now, if you figure more than half of those are big business, more than half of those are the IBMs and Raytheons of the world, and they have a team of attorneys that do their paperwork. Of course, they're compliant. They do a lot of government work. Let's just say, for argument's sake, though, half of those are big and half of them are small. That leaves about 160,000 active small for-profit vendors in SAM. Our organization's done 80,000 SAM registrations. So we're technically responsible right now for half the small businesses that are active in the system. But let's just say, for example, the other 80,000 are not necessarily all of them are compliant, but at least they're active. They got that far. What would they have done to not be compliant? That's what I'm going to show you next. This is the biggest area where most people fail on compliance. When I searched for New Beginnings, it brought up this company here out of Kansas. One thing I want you to notice, under purpose of registration, federal assistance awards only, meaning they're not interested in going out and applying for or bidding on contracts. They only want to apply for grants. So whether or not they're a company that can sell a product or service, and they are trying to sell to the government and don't know it, they can't sell to the government because they're not set up to sell to the government. They're only set up for grants. So this is a prime example right here. If you look at their reps and certs, they have no reps and certs because they're not set up to sell to the government. Did not choose to pursue federal contracts. This part right here is the major area where most people who self-certify either never do it right or never even process it to begin with, or they fail, they do something wrong in here or several things wrong in here, and they never become compliant. I'm going to show you an actual reps and certs. We're just going to search for a company called, let's say, ABC. All right, these guys are set up for all awards. Federal assistance only, federal assistance only. ABC Staffing Company, I'm sure they're registered to sell to the government, but they're only registered for assistance, for grants. American Builders and Constructors Supply, I know they want to sell to the government. They're set up for all awards, but they have delinquent federal debt, and it's probably not even their fault. It's probably a mistake they made when they did this filing. So they're showing to the government right now that they owe the government money, and they probably don't. But they probably didn't register properly to begin with, and they messed this part up. Same thing with these guys here, ABC Fire Control. You'll see a lot of people in here that they're showing a federal debt, when in all actuality, they probably don't have any federal debt. They just made a mistake when registering. Let's look at these guys because they're set up for all awards. So we're going to go view details, and I'm going to go to their reps and certs. This is the area where most people make the biggest mistakes. Reps and certs, or called FAR and DFAR provisions. These guys only have FAR regulations. I'm going to find one that has FAR and DFAR, because if you're going to export or import, you're going to have both.
Okay. So when you say, actually have FAR regulations, what does that mean? Does that mean you just know the FAR regulations, or
No, FAR and DFAR provisions they're the legal part of doing business with the government. Let me go back to search, and let's find one with the word export in it, because they definitely will have both FAR and DFARs. Okay, see right here it says download FAR report or download FAR and DFARs report.
Okay.
This is the legal binding agreement between this company and the government that they are registered properly. Now, I want you to notice right here it says by submitting this certification and there's a blank. This is the very first mistake they made. They didn't actually sign the document. They didn't actually, there's no signature there. This is where the person who processes this puts their name. So if we process this for you, this would say by submitting this certification, Jessica Summers, who's your case manager, is attesting to the actually representing. She would actually sign this. And by her signing it, she's also taking the legal responsibility of doing it correctly. If she makes a mistake, knock on wood, so far we've done 80,000 SAM registrations and we have not made a mistake that we didn't catch and fix. We have not yet had the government come to us and say, this is a mistake you made. We think you did it on purpose. We're going to fine you. That has not happened. No one's perfect all the time. Of course we make mistakes. Everybody does. Eventually it's going to happen. We're going to make a mistake. It's going to get caught and there's going to be a fine assessed. The fine is $10,000 to $100,000 per failure. But your case manager who signs off on this document, when that day comes and they make a mistake and they get called out on it, the case manager pays the fine, not the vendor. The signee, the person who signs this document, is the one who pays the fine, not the business. Okay?
Okay. So
and that's,
you get fined if they just look at your SAM registration and say, oh, this is wrong, you know, we're just going to fine you, or do you get fined, I guess, once you bid on a contract and they figure out, you know, that something's wrong?
Usually what happens, this is what usually happens. The government isn't going out of their way to look for these mistakes because the government's busy enough as it is. Usually what happens is you broker a contract, you win it, and you beat somebody else out who's been brokering contracts for a long time, and now they're mad that you beat them. They're going to go through your reps and certs and find mistakes. They're going to report you to the GAO to try and get you to lose that contract and get you fined so you quit, to try and keep you from competing. That's usually what happens. I mean, I have seen where the government's found the mistakes, but it's not usually the government. It usually comes to the GAO, which means someone reported you. So the bottom line is this. You don't want to process these 78 reps and certs. I'm telling you don't, because just the sheer size of them. Some of them are small. Some of them are just a paragraph or two. Some of them are 50 and 60 paragraphs. And you have to literally not only do them, you have to process them, but you also have to, back up here at the top, certify that you've read each of them, that you've, by submitting the certification, you're attesting that they're accurate. You're certifying that you've read the entire NAICS table, and you're certifying that you understand you may be subject to criminal prosecution and penalties if you make a mistake, if you misrepresent, okay?
Okay.
To go through and read all these, just to go through and read them is going to take you weeks to read them and understand them and make sure you do them correctly, because some of them are huge. This one's, I think this one's 60 pages, or 60 paragraphs, excuse me. The book that tells you how to do these reps and certs is called the Federal Acquisition Regulation Manual. That manual alone is over 2,800 pages to tell you how to do, and this is just one part of SAM. So when people come to me and say, hey, we want to save a little money, we already did our SAM, so we don't need any help there, I've heard it thousands of times, and 99% of the time when I pull their file up, they're not even compliant, they're not even active. You know, oh, well, we did it 6 months ago, we're good. No, you're not. You're not even in here. You never became active to begin with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Wanting to save a few bucks and do this on your own is really not going to save you anything. It's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you time. The biggest reason people fail in the government system is not because their bid was too high. The biggest reason people fell in the system is because they were never compliant to begin with. One of my very first clients came to me and said he was referred by a government purchasing agent. So he called me up and said, listen, I'm going to trust you only because the purchasing agent who wants to buy from me said you were trustworthy. But he says, I have my doubts because I paid an attorney to do all this paperwork. And between the attorney and this guy, I paid $40-something thousand annual salary plus bonuses and commissions and all this over the last year. He said he spent over $100,000 trying to get registered and win government contracts. And they submitted like 40 bids, and they never won a single one of them. Well, the first thing I asked him is, why? Why are you not winning them? And he goes, well, we don't know. That's why we're going to pay you. I said, well, every time you do a bid, you can submit a debriefing, and the purchasing agent has to tell you why they didn't choose you and why they hired who they did. And he goes, they do? Yeah, the attorney that registered you didn't tell you that? It's like, the attorney didn't tell us anything. They just registered us. So they submitted 40 bids, didn't win a single one of them, and never knew why. And I'm like, that, number one, is ludicrous. That's the definition of insanity, is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. I looked through some of their bids, and their bids were good. The guy that was submitting the bids was actually doing a good job. The reason why they weren't winning them is because they weren't compliant. They were active, but they weren't compliant for the types of contracts they were going after. They didn't have their DFARs, and everything they do is about exporting and importing. So they were never compliant to do any type of exporting or importing services, period, and they didn't know that. Wasted all that money and time on nothing because they just weren't compliant to begin with. He said, you know what, John, I can't fathom how, if I spent $100,000 and won no contracts for a couple of grand, you're going to help me do this, and I'm going to win contracts. That doesn't make any sense. But I've already invested this much. I might as well throw another 4 or 5 grand at it. That was his attitude. And they're a very successful company now because they're fully compliant and they're using the system properly. They know what they're doing. The other reason why people lose contracts that are active and are compliant is not because they overbid. It's because they underbid. Their price is too low. More people lose more contracts because their cost is too low than any other reason in the system if they're active and compliant. And if you've seen that movie War Dogs, that was the whole premise of the entire movie. When they told him you won the contract, but you were the lowest bidder. And he goes, really? We were the lowest? By how much? And they all started laughing. They're like, billions.
Yeah. So, I guess I would have to just speak her, I guess, on this one. And so I guess I have to, explain to her exactly, why we would consider it. So basically, you're saying